expert insights on the new U.S. Customs landscape. My name is Angela Lewis. I am the Global Head of Customs here at Flexport, and we have a great webinar for you today. But before we begin, let's cover a few housekeeping items. On your screen, you will see a sidebar to the right on the main page. If at any time you need any assistance during this live webinar, please message us in the help chat located on the sidebar. You can also ask questions via the Q&A on the sidebar. Time permitting, at the end of the presentation, we will answer a few audience questions. Be sure to get your questions in early. In the menu above on your screen, you have two tabs. In the first tab, you can download a copy of today's slide deck. And in the second tab, there is a brief feedback survey for this webinar. We really love and appreciate all your feedback, so please fill out that before exiting the webinar today. Now on to a brief legal note. Please keep in mind that all information provided in this session is based on the situation at this current time and may not be customized to your specific business requirements. We always recommend reaching out to a Flexport expert to discuss your particular situation. So joining me today are my colleagues, Stephen Lunn, Senior Customs Manager, and Anna Zajac, Senior Trade Advisory Manager here at Flexport. We also have a special guest, Patrice Lafayette, who is the Vice President of the Western Region at Roanoke Insurance Group. We're really excited to have her here to talk to you all. Moving on to today's agenda, we're going to start off by covering the latest tariff news, followed by a deep dive into bonds. Then we'll cover duty savings and deferral strategies, and we'll close it out with a review of what's next on the horizon and a live Q&A session. So let me turn it over now to Stephen, who is going to give us an update on where we are now.
Hey everyone. So obviously things keep changing, but we did have a little bit of a pause. So there's not quite as much news as there was last time where we were getting stuff kind of day to day. But I'll go ahead and give you guys some updates. Wanted to start out by just kind of showing a timeline of how the tariffs have changed just since we've been doing as things have been changing. So, we're seeing the additional 0% tariff kind of went into place. Then in April 5th, we were seeing the 10% additional. Then April 9th, the country specific, and then April 10th, the additional 10%. We're just seeing all of these changes happening very rapidly. So again, I know you're probably being reached out to by your brokers. You're probably being reached out to quite a lot for what additional items are being added to your 7501s, what kind of additional information is being required. And this is just sort of a timeline to show you that things are happening very, very quickly. So we want to make sure that you're aware of that you're kind of seeing that. One benefit is that there was that 90-day pause, but these questions will probably start coming back up again on July 8th, as that is when that 90-day pause from the IEEPA reciprocal tariffs will expire. We can go to the next slide, please. Just wanted to talk about two things here, exclusions and 232 updates. So there was a message sent out by Customs on April 11th stating that there would be exclusions put in place for certain smartphones, computers, chips, and other items. Now, this basically right after we got a response from the president saying nobody is getting off the hook for the unfair trade balances. So I think this proves that we need to be very, very careful as to how we're making decisions because things are happening very, very quickly, but they're sort of being taken back right afterwards. Now, these are still in place. These exemptions are still, or exclusions are still expected to continue to go forward, but there is conversation that things may change in the future as well. On top of that, we're seeing additional 232 investigations opened. So some of the big ones, or the three main ones that have happened, are process critical minerals. This is a big one because it sort of has minerals that have undergone activities that occur after the mineral ore. And this includes derivative products, complete products, anything where between the process where the ore is extracted from a mine up through its conversion into a metal powder, or master alloy. The other thing to keep in mind is that this is not only including rare earth metals, it is also including aluminum, magnesium, nickel, tin, titanium, and zinc, among other elements. So this may be more broad-reaching than you would expect kind of reading processed critical minerals. The other two items that are being targeted for investigation are semiconductors and pharmaceuticals. Both of those are open to comments currently, and that comment section does end on May 7th. So if either of those do impact you, you can go, if you download this presentation, you'll be able to click on those and get to the page where you can submit comments. We can go to the next slide, please. Lastly, I wanted to talk about sort of some international updates. So some things that have happened, the EU states did approve countermeasures that would apply to $26 billion in goods, which matches the economic scope of the US 232 tariffs. So this is basically expected to be a one for one. It's expected to impact 26 billion from the EU, so 26 billion coming out of the US. Tariffs of 25% on US origin goods, including food and beverage products, personal care and household products, textiles, wood, and transportation equipment have all been approved, but all measures have been suspended for 90 days until July 14th. Similar to our 90-day pause, this is just to facilitate negotiations between countries to see if we can come to some kind of agreement. On the other side, China, just some kind of general updates, right? As of now, the US import tariffs on Chinese products are 125% plus 20% that originally happened, coming to 145%. At the same time, China has put tariffs on US products of 125%. Recently, it was China warned that it will take corresponding countermeasures for any deals made at the expense of China's interest. So, looking at any kind of deals that are made, there may be questions on them. And then, kind of just last night, there was a message from the president that stated the tariffs on China will come down substantially, but they will not be zero. So we know that changes are coming, but again, we're not sure exactly how those are going to take place because there is no saying what exactly that means. We know it won't be zero, but we know that it's expected to come down from the 125%. So that is all I have for the latest news. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to Patrice to talk about bonds.
Thank you, Stephen. Good morning, everybody. I'm Patrice Lafayette with Roanoke Insurance Group. We specialize in insurance and carnets and surety bonds for the international trade community. And today I'm going to talk more specifically on just the import bond in general and how the trade remedy tariffs are affecting that. Next slide, please. So we're going to start off just as a quick review of how you calculate a standard bond. It's 10% of the duties, taxes, and fees paid in 12 months. The minimum bond amount is $50,000, and they're in between 50 to 100. It's in increments of 10,000. So any duties, taxes, and fees between 0 and $1 million would go rounded up to the nearest 10,000, and then anything greater than $1 million would be rounded up to the nearest 100,000. So from 100,000 to 200,000. This is including all duties, taxes, and fees paid or payable to customs, including anti-dumping, including 201, 232, and 301 tariffs as well. I thought this was kind of just an interesting slide to look at. Historically, and this is as of the end of 2024, we've always seen the majority of our bonds, and this is all of customs data, be at $50,000. So that was about 95% of all bonds were $50,000. At the end of 2024, that dropped to about 88,000. And at the end of 2025 and even into 2026, we anticipate that number to drop further. Where we are seeing a lot of large bond requests are, over the $1 million request, and even the latest, we've seen it up to in the billions at this point of bond calculations that people are looking at while trying to anticipate the tariffs that have been put into place and also what might come into the future. So certainly a big change for liability for us, but also for importers to be able to obtain those high-level bonds. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about insufficiency and sufficiency of your bond. Again, this is just data that I think is interesting to share. This is all of customs data, the historic bond insufficiencies, and you can see the big jump in 2019. No surprise, that was the original tariffs. 2020 kind of dropped a little bit. During COVID, customs paused on issuing mandated increases for a few months, but it kind of just trickled down over the years, with those original tariffs. So far in 2025, for the first quarter, Customs has issued a little over 2,200 mandated increases, a lot in the month of April, which you can see is about half of what was the whole year of 2024. So we certainly are anticipating a large increase for 2025 overall. So this is what a mandated increase looks like when you receive something from Customs where they determine that your bond is insufficient. So that $50,000 bond you may have had no longer is sufficient to use for your upcoming imports. Again, it's calculated at the 10% of your duties, taxes, and fees for the past 12 months, and it's a rolling 12 months. They review it on a monthly basis at the beginning every month. And so even if your bond renewed 2 months ago, they're looking at the previous 12 months.
If your bond is found to be insufficient, you'll receive this letter as the importer, and the surety company also receives the letter, which is then shared with the customs broker. And even in the letter, Customs is suggesting to forecast for the future 12 months because they do indicate what bond amount they suggest you should have based on the previous 12 months. But historically, we have seen that many times this gets increased a couple months later, especially with the unknowing of what's coming forward with tariffs and how much those duties might be. That changes what a bond amount looks like. So a lot of times we are recommending that you are looking and forecasting into the future, and Customs is doing the same. I recognize that forecasting is not something that's easy to do right now, but certainly something that we highly recommend, not just looking at what tariffs could possibly be, but also looking at your supply chains and if you're going to change your import activity or not. Customs requires 15 days to terminate a bond, so they do give you that time to replace the bond plus an additional 30 days. So there's not a lot of time to turn this around once you receive it. They also have the ability to render a bond grossly insufficient and actually render it insufficient immediately. You won't even have the 45 days. That just means that whatever duties, taxes, and fees you've paid in the last 12 months have significantly gone over your current bond amount, and they would like you to get a higher bond amount immediately. Right now, we have not seen any of those issued so far. So just tips again on calculating your bond amount. Again, the rule of thumb, projecting into the next 12 months, making sure you're looking if you are importing anything subject to anti-dumping or countervailing duties. De minimis is obviously also something that is changing potentially next month. So looking at those types of things and what your future holds in terms of how the tariffs are affecting the volume into your import bond. And we're recommending to overestimate, and I'll go through stacking in a minute, but the reason why is because it can cause some problems for you if you don't have a high enough bond amount and you have to continue to increase it, every few months, because we did see that in the first round of tariffs. So we definitely think that the risk of overestimating is certainly less than the risk of underestimating. Roanoke does have a bond calculator that you'll get here if you download the slides that you can access on our website that will help you learn to be able to calculate your bond. You can also use other sources of data. You can use your ACE portal to look at your data and the historical data of your imports. You can work with your customs broker who also has the data, and they can also work with us as the surety company because we get downloaded data from customs as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about aggregate and stacking liability and what the risks of that with the insufficiencies that we just talked about. So the bond, per customs is a contractual agreement between the surety company, the importer, and customs. It is a liability exposure to the surety company because it's a guaranteed payment to customs. If you don't pay your duty to customs, then they will come to the surety company on your behalf for the bond to pay. The liability is exposed to the surety company as long as there's an entry that hasn't liquidated. So standardly, because of the liquidation process, a bond usually always has two bond periods with liability just because the liquidation process is so long. But when you're looking at increases every few months, then that stacking can increase. And you're not just looking at the one bond period that you have open. If you have open entries, then you're looking at the total aggregate for all the bond periods with the open entries. And I'll kind of give you an example on the next slide. So let's just say you had a $400,000 bond in November. In January, you got a mandated increase for $500,000. And this is a live example. We did see this happen. And, and then all of a sudden you didn't project to have the right bond amount. So in April, you get another mandated increase for $800,000. Again, the projections weren't done, so you get another mandated increase in September for a $1.8 million bond. You don't just have liability for $1.8 million, you actually have a total liability of $3.5 million by adding all of those bond periods with open entries. This is a very big difference, obviously, between 1.8 and 3.5 million because the surety companies are looking at that total 3.5 million of what they're underwriting on your behalf. We can go to the next slide. So, you want to avoid that stacking and aggregate liability. Again, making the accurate continuous bond sufficiency projections and avoiding midterm increases. If you can try to look at your bond renewal date and get ahead of getting a mandated increase from customs, we certainly look at recommending and looking at that right now. Reviewing it 45 to 60 days prior to your renewal. There may be underwriting requirements with the surety company. Collateral may be required. You may have to be talking to your bank. And so those are things that, you need to look at when you're thinking about increasing your bond, but certainly looking at it at renewal, not just waiting for customs. And the risk of failing to increase your bond, your bond would either be rendered insufficient if you don't file the mandated increase that they're requiring, or if they render it grossly insufficient and it's turned off immediately, no entries will be allowed. Your imports would be completely stopped. You might have to use single transaction bonds, which can become costly, or even more underwriting because they're calculated differently. There's stacking and aggregate liability issues, demurrage charges, storage, fees that can increase certainly because you can't import. Additional collateral or even additional premium might be required. Sometimes that happens as bonds get very large. And obviously underwriters are looking at this a little bit closer when you're not able to do it in a timely manner to increase your bond. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, what we're looking for on an underwriting standpoint, and just kind of give you a brief overview of what we've seen in the past as well. Again, why we underwrite: it's a contractual obligation. The bond between the importer and the surety company and customs. It's a financial guarantee. And we obviously we've been writing bonds for a very long time. Been in business since 1935. So we have a history of what we've looked at. We've looked at higher losses over the years. Historically, our losses have always been with anti-dumping and countervailing duty. I will say that in the last few years that has changed. We've seen debit voucher claims which are basically bounce checks due to multiple reasons, either from the economy issues or sometimes even just from the banks not being able to approve that high of a payment through their ACH with the importer. We've also seen a lot of classification changes, whether that is anti-dumping or not. Sometimes it's not. So we anticipate that this might be something that might be more prevalent now. I know that it's very confusing to keep up with the tariffs and filing the right entries. And so I think that this is something we're going to see more of. And then there's always market capacity. A surety company is essentially an insurance company. So it's really what their appetite is for the risk and how large of a bond they may want to write, or what kind of risk they want to take on. Under other conditions that influence underwriters, of course, the trade remedy tariffs and forced labor, liquidated damages, and supplemental duty bills. This would be if an importer has historically received any claims from customs and hasn't paid them. Then, we look at that history with the importer. And then, of course, economic issues, like I mentioned, not just inflation, but also recession. During COVID, one of the things we saw was a lot of companies were doing really well, but it was also temporary, right? A lot of, let's just say grocery stores or even treadmills, those types of companies had very, very good financials, but there's only so many treadmills you could buy. So they do look at not just that 1 year, sort of historically looking at how that company is doing. So when we're looking at financials, we would like to look at audited financials. They're always best. It's a little bit different. The surety companies are looking for mostly cash. It's current assets, things that are easy liquidable to be able to pay duties, taxes, and fees to customs. If you don't have the cash in the bank, what else can you quickly turn around to be able to pay the duty? A lot of the times, people have a lot of goods in a warehouse, and sometimes that doesn't turn over very much. So that's something else they look at, like how often is your inventory turning over? They want to make sure that there is, a profitability in the company, and they're looking at your working capital and your net worth. We also are looking at bank loans. So if you have a long-term debt or even short-term debt, what credit rating are you getting from the bank? Because if the bank is looking at a higher interest rate more than the standard, then the surety company is going to see that as more of a risk. if your financial statements don't support the risk, we can always look at other third-party financial statements from a sister company or a parent company. General indemnity agreements can also be used. Collateral can also be required if none of that is qualifying. And sometimes that collateral may not, again, just be for one time. It's not because of the stacking that I talked about before. Sometimes, surety companies ask for collateral on multiple bond periods because the exposure is so high. So other things that we look at as well, obviously, is the bond amount or the aggregate amount that we talked about, the importer's credit rating, if they have one, whether that's S&P or DNB. We look at the commodity and the entry type. Sometimes some of the risks are higher on certain commodities or certain entry types, like I said, anti-dumping or countervailing duty. We look at the duty rates. We look at the liquidation history of the importer and the claims history. Do you historically have a liquidation that normally goes through and you don't have a claims history? Then they're going to look at that as a positive factor. But if you have consistently had issues, with the surety company and not being able to pay on time or have not being able to resolve the claims that have been put against your bond, then they're going to look at that and question that, or also take that, looking at it on a negative side of it. We're looking at red flags, whether or not there's CBP extensions on current entries that haven't liquidated on the bond. And of course, late payments, whether that's by yourself or, or a customs broker that you've worked with. So I'm just going to kind of end this with some best practices that we think are really important right now. Of course, I'm just going to keep reiterating this because I think it's very important, is discussing and projecting the plans for the next 12 months. Reviewing if you're currently filing de minimis entries, because that might be changing. Look at anything subject to anti-dumping or countervailing duty, because that obviously increases the duty rate as well. And I highly recommend getting ahead of underwriting. If you're anticipating a larger bond, much larger than $50,000, I really recommend discussing that with your customs broker. Discussing the possibility of collateral. One of the things that we saw in the first round of tariffs was the banks weren't able to keep up with the collateral requests. So importers were going to the banks trying to get a letter of credit, and it was taking them much more than 30 days, 60 days. And so if you're looking at that increase from customs and you only have 45 days, that may not give you enough time, right? And also looking at banks, because the surety companies are looking at the credit ratings of the bank. Some of these very large bonds, one bank may not be able to give you a letter of credit. You might have to go to multiple banks. So you want to get ahead of all of this and give yourself some time rather than feeling, under that pressure of the mandated increase. Going back to that renewal date of the bond and potential stacking liability, trying to look at your renewal date. If it's coming up in the next few months, then start thinking about your bond amount, even if it's in 6 months from now. You want to be able to give yourself, again, that time and that cushion to look without having to deal with the stacking liability issue. Keep in mind that customs requires 15-day termination notice. Again, don't wait, use your resources. You're going to keep hearing us all say that over the next year, I assume, is just keep looking at everything, using your resources, working with your customs broker who, like Flexport, is working very closely with the surety company, and having that open communication is very key with your customs broker and your surety company at this point. Actively monitoring updates, being a part of these webinars that Flexport is actively putting on, I think is fantastic. Keeping up with data that's information. I know that sometimes it changes daily and even hourly. And so I think being a part of it and trying to get in front of hearing everything you can is very important as well. And then, of course, reviewing your supply chain plans. What are your plans? Are you going to continue importing from certain countries? Are you going to change that? Are you going to change your manufacturing? Maybe you're not importing as much. So certainly looking at that, while you're looking at your bond amount. And one other big important thing is, of course, I mentioned this as well, is reviewing your ACH accounts with your bank. Because again, in the first round of tariffs that we saw a lot of debit voucher claims. And it wasn't because someone couldn't pay the duty. It was simply because the bank denied the payment because of the limit that was given to them to pay customs. So you want to make sure that you're talking to the bank, making sure that if your ACH is being paid to customs directly, that your limits are sufficient to what the duty rates you're paying. And I believe that's it. So I'm going to pass it back to Anna, and thank you again for your time.
Thanks, Patrice. So this week's section is on duty deferral. And we'll just begin with talking about what factors determine the rates of duty. We've gotten a lot of questions from companies about what are other companies doing. This is obviously a big change for retailers that were previously using de minimis procedures. Some companies have going concern questions or ability to bear. So, what are my options now? We've even had companies say like, hey, can I just abandon it on the container or leave it the container on the vessel and let it circle around the world and come back in case the rates go down? So this slide sort of unpacks all those considerations and what your options are. So just starting with, when is the liability for duties incurred? It accrues on imported merchandise upon their arrival within the customs port. So you owe it immediately once they arrive in the U.S. The rates of duty that apply to imported goods are determined by the harmonized tariff classification, the country of origin of the goods, and trade remedy scope language. So for tariff classification code, goods could qualify for normal trade relations rates of duty, special rates of duties if they qualify for a free trade agreement, or column 2 duty rates. So that's why the country of origin is real important. And then we have the scope language, right? So is my product covered by a trade remedy, and what does that say? So there's one other complexifier, which is key dates that determine the applicability or the applicable duty rate. So rates of duty applicable to imported goods, excluding tariff rate quotas, is the rate in effect at the time of entry. Some of the IEEPA tariff measures had an exception for cargo already on the water. That's like a one-time exception. It's generally applicable based on the date of entry. If goods are shipped in bond to another customs port, that's different from where they arrived. So I'm thinking goods arriving on the West Coast, traveling to Chicago, for example, in bond, or arriving in the U.S. by rail from Canada. The rate of duty is going to be based on the date, the rate in effect on the date that an immediate transportation document is accepted by customs. So then there's one more special provision, and we're going to unpack what a bonded warehouse is on a later slide. But just on the topic of duty rates, what rates of duty apply to my merchandise? So when goods are entered into a bonded warehouse, they're dutiable at the rates in effect at the time the merchandise is withdrawn for consumption. And then when another class of merchandise is called an FTZ, or a foreign trade zone. When goods are entered under non-privileged foreign status, they're dutiable at the rate in effect when the goods are entered for consumption, which means like at a later date, that later entry date. But goods that enter an FTZ under foreign privilege status, and you see that word foreign privilege status in some of these trade remedy scope orders like the IEEPA, Section 232, and even anti-dumping and countervailing duty. Those goods are dutiable at the rate in effect when that privilege application is filed, usually when the goods are entered into an FTZ. Next slide, please. So going back to the topic of what are my options, I don't have the money to pay it right now, or there's just too much financial risk. I'm holding the goods for a period of time. I might end up exporting them to another country. My hub has been to the US with the model of consolidating cargo for the US and then shipping it from the US to other spokes or regions of the world. So how can I avoid paying that duty? Because at 145% rate on Chinese goods, it just doesn't make sense to me, and it's too much financial risk. And now I've got Patrice on my back telling me I need to increase my bond. So what can we do? So again, goods, looking at our timeline, when goods are imported into the US, that's when you owe the duty. But you can deposit goods in a bonded warehouse. The two classes that are most common are class 2 for private or class 3 for public warehouses. And then there's another bonded warehouse called a foreign trade zone, or an FTZ. And the FTZ is basically a physical location within the U.S. that is not considered within the customs territory of the U.S. So when goods are placed on either of those warehouses, you don't pay duty on them until you're ready to remove the goods. So either if you export them, you never pay duty on them, or if you sell them, then you pay duty when you're shipping them or releasing them from the warehouse. So just kind of thinking about these two models, we've outlined some key considerations here for the different bonded warehousing option. Actually, let me just pause back for a minute. The bonded warehouse is different from an FTZ because it's considered to be merchandise received in a bonded warehouse is considered to be in continuous customs custody. So even though it is within the customs territory, unlike an FTZ, you still don't have to pay duty on it until the goods are withdrawn. But there are some nuances that you need to consider. So one is the rates of duty applicable may be affected by the type of entry filed, as we said on the prior slide, whether an in-bond entry is filed or a consumption entry when goods arrive, and the warehouse class, considering an FTZ merchandise covered by a trade remedy. Some companies are concerned, so the rates of duty are in a state of flux, unlike any time that I've ever seen in my career, and they may increase or they may decrease. As we saw this month, rates went from 10% to 145 on goods from China under the IEEPA measures. And then for other countries, they were escalating from 10 to a country-specific rate until the U.S. paused those for 90 days, and now they're in hold. So we have those country-specific rates that are kind of sitting out there on the horizon. We have messaging coming from the White House. We're in the process of negotiating trade deals with anyone that wants to come to us and work out a deal. So we don't know what the rates of duty will be, but the key factors that determine those rates of duty, we do know, right? So it's almost like using a put or a call on a duty rate. You can either enter goods in a warehouse and pay the rate of duty in effect when the goods are withdrawn. You can enter goods in an FTZ that are subject to the trade remedy and lock in that 10% rate today, knowing that it might go higher. But what if it goes lower and I've locked in that rate? So those are all considerations that companies are having to traverse right now and make some decisions on. We're hearing companies talk about working capital considerations. So even if the rate may come down, we don't think it will come down immediately for China. We don't want to pay 100% right now. And even if it does, maybe I'll just export the goods and re-import them so that I can get around that locked-in rate. But in any case, the other piece or layer of this conversation is like the framework for a bonded warehouse or an FTZ. So goods that are entered into a bonded warehouse are traditionally tracked by carton count, and they require advanced CBP permission to manipulate. Like if you want to open a box and pull out individually packaged items, you have to send a request to CBP in advance for that. It becomes an administrative burden to track SKUs and tie them to a specific carton that you've asked CBP to open. So not ideal for like a traditional retail model that has like 100 shirts in a box. And then if you want to ship the goods from the warehouse, you have to, once they're sold, you have to obtain CBP approval in advance. And so those are huge negative factors for a bonded warehouse that might not align with the scope of work that traditional retailers or models have implemented. The FTC framework allows goods to be tracked at the SKU level. You don't have to keep them in the boxes that they arrived in or even track them to that box. An entry can be filed weekly. So you file a weekly estimate, and then after of what I think I'm going to sell or ship this week. And then at the end of the week, I file the customs entry and say, this is what actually happened. So from a flexibility standpoint, an FTZ is more aligned to what we're seeing for a lot of companies, and it has a lot of more flexibility than a bonded warehouse might have, but it's not going to work well for companies if the rates go down. It could work well if the rates go up and you've goods are entered under that foreign privilege status. So we are working on a trade alert on this topic, so more to come. Stay tuned to our website. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Angela.
Thanks, Anna. All right, let's cover what's coming up next, some of the things we actually know. Next slide, please. So as we say, this is a very fluid situation. These are some dates and upcoming timelines that we thought we would go ahead and remind everyone. This is not all inclusive because we know that there are trade talks going on right now in the administration with other countries. And there could be possible other things that come in the meantime, but dates to be aware of. So May 2nd is the termination of de minimis for China and Hong Kong goods of origin. So regardless of the country of export, the focus here is what is the country of origin for these goods. If they are under $800, but the country of origin is China or Hong Kong, on May 2nd, those will no longer be admissible. We did see a CSMS message released last night publishing error codes and status notifications for de minimis. So we know that CBP is working really hard to make sure that this time this is turned off and not having to be turned back on like it was back in February. We also see that on May 3rd, we will have the implementation of the 25% tariff on auto parts under Section 232. This list is available. It's rather extensive, everything from tires to seat belts, all kinds of auto parts are included on this list. So if you import any goods like this, please work with your broker to see what the impact is for you and your products. The original EO did state no later than May 3rd. So there is a possibility that this could actually be implemented prior to May 3rd. But as we get closer to that date, it's looking more and more likely that it would be on the May 3rd deadline. On May 27th, the IEEPA reciprocal tariff exemption ends. This was an in-transit exemption on the reciprocal tariff, so anything that shipped before April 5th and arrived before May 27th was exempt and could use an exemption code for the reciprocal IEEPA tariffs, both from China and for rest of world. This will end, which means that as of May 27th, all goods, regardless of when they shipped, that are importing into the U.S. will have 125% tariff for China and Hong Kong and a 10% tariff for the rest of the world. On July 1st, there will be a 90-day review of this May 2nd de minimis termination. The reason we call this out here is because it's interesting to note that on the reciprocal tariff executive order, it did state that once the systems are in place, de minimis will end for all countries, and we think that this 90-day review could be an interesting deadline. Does that mean reciprocal or that de minimis could end for the rest of the world prior to the 90-day review? Absolutely, but the 90 days is an interesting timeline to kind of keep in mind. Also, on July 8th, there is the expiration of the 90-day pause for country-specific reciprocal tariffs. So we will see what happens on July 8th. We might go back to country-specific reciprocal tariff rates. There could be another extension. Something could also change before then, but that July 8th deadline is the 90-day pause termination that we should be reviewing. Now, on October 14th, this is actually 180 days from the April 17th announcement of the 301 investigation assessing fees on foreign-built vessels. CBP has said that the fees will be assessed in a phase approached, and currently a comment window is open, and comments are due by May 19th. So we expect the first set of fees to be assessed on foreign-made vessels coming from China on October 14th. It's also interesting in the publication, the announcement, there was comments about HMF being assessed at land borders and a 10% fee being assessed. So I'm hopeful that we'll get more information, if not before the October 14th deadline, soon on what that could look like. It has a large impact to shipments that would unload in Canada and then move via rail into the US. And lastly, on November 26th, we expect a report due to the White House on timber, lumber, and copper 232 investigation. So definitely a lot more to come in the May timeline, a few more things in July, and definitely we'll continue to see changes as we progress through the year. Though, like I said, this does not include other things that may transpire in between now and then. So next slide, please. If we can talk for a second about what you guys can do in the meantime. And we really wanted to focus here a little bit on reasonable care. You know, importers are required to use reasonable care, and this covers the declared value, the tariff classification, and the rate of duty, which is provided to CBP at time of entry. Importers are the responsible party for providing accurate information to customs and are primarily liable for duties, fees, and penalties of non-compliance. So our advice to importers is to do 4 things today. And number 1, make sure you understand the tariffs. These are very complicated, and depending on the product and country of origin of which you're sourcing your products, could range pretty dramatically. If we look at how many HTS codes may be layered onto a product today, it's getting to be quite extensive. The most important thing you can do as importers is make sure you understand what tariffs apply to your products today as exemptions expire and as further investigations such as 232 auto parts apply. Some clients are needing to make additional spreadsheets because systems, product libraries, and databases aren't able to handle all the information, but it's really important that you know what is applicable to each of your products at a line level. And with that, and in doing so, it is also very important that you review all entries filed by your brokers today. Overseeing operations, I can tell you that there are a lot of different tariffs that apply, and it is difficult for brokers to keep up with all the changes as they take place for all the different products. As the importer, it being your responsibility, it is imperative that you review and ensure that the entries are correct. If you could go back 1 slide, please, we'll finish out the responsible care. So in doing so, in both understanding the tariffs and reviewing entries, the focus should be on compliance. We are getting a lot of questions. A lot of people are asking about non-compliant activities. There's a lot of conversations going around on DDP and lowering duty rates, changing countries of origin. I think it's most important for everyone to keep in mind that the administration has been very clear that they will enforce to the highest level of penalties any sort of non-compliance. So we urge all of our clients to focus on that. As you're having conversations with your C-suite, make sure that although the numbers are really large today, that the long-term benefits, but also the long-term liability is looked at when you're assessing all options. Compliance will be important for companies to ensure they are able to do business in the U.S. moving forward. And then lastly, obtain all necessary documentation. We're seeing a lot of clients who never used to claim USMCA before, look and to see if that is something that they want to do. If you are using an exception right now because goods have been in transit and transshipped during the timeline, make sure you can verify through a bill of lading or through other documentation that you have a valid exemption. We have seen customs issue CF-29s when they have a question about exemptions being used on entries. So expect very quick and fast action by customs if they think that there is anything that has been filed incorrectly. And the best thing you can do as an importer is go ahead and get all the documentation together so that the reason and why you did what you did is already prepared in case customs asks for entry docs or does issue a CF-28 or 29. All right, next slide, please. So as we have done in the past, we would also encourage all importers to look at their ACE data. ACE is the system of choice for customs, and everyone has access to ACE via their importer profile. So anyone attending this webinar can have a complimentary ACE analysis. You can email us at Flexport. We've designed an ACE analysis that can reveal savings and compliance risk for all last 5 years of your data. It's a free tool that will help you identify instances where savings might be available based off this historical data. So we've helped clients optimize classification, country of origin, and free trade agreement use, but we've also found errors in past entries, unlocked savings in ways that they might not have thought possible. It also builds more efficient processes between importers, partners, and agents. So if you have not been in ACE before, if you have not pulled this information, we highly recommend you do that now. This is a source of truth for customs. The documents that you have from your broker are likely going to match ACE, but ACE is a source of truth, and we advise all importers to get comfortable utilizing ACE. We can help you set up an account if you have not been in there before. And lastly, as just another reminder, we want to give you a couple points of contact for Flexport if you need some additional support. So you can contact Anna and our customs advisory team with any questions at advisory@flexport.com. We also have a classification group who can support with classifications and duty rates. If you are a de minimis importer and you have products that you now need to ensure 10-digit classification, please reach out to us. We can support. And then, like I just mentioned, the importer ACE analysis, our BD team is happy to support you in looking and reviewing your data for possible savings opportunities and future adjustments that you may want to make. And with that, I think we have some time for Q&A. So let me start with a question for you, Patrice. For bonds, are you able to increase your current bond, or do you need to do bond stacking?
No, that's a great question. You are able to increase your bond at any time. Like I said, I think the biggest thing is looking at the renewal date because the stacking does occur at the renewal date or the new date, effective date of the bond as it becomes effective. So if you want to look now, and I mean, I certainly would look at it, even if there is some stacking, the surety company can still review the overall aggregate and let you know.
Fantastic. And we have another one. If you get a bond insufficiency notice and the bond is canceled and you are on a PMS, does that mean you need to pay shipment by shipment and PMS is null?
You can file for single transaction bonds at that point.
Yes, absolutely. Great. Stephen, let me ask you about transshipments. We have a question on that. So will the tariffs be applied if the container is transshipped? Meaning my cargo was shipped within the period of the 10% from Vietnam, but due to transshipment, it would apply 20% or even a higher tariff. Oh, Stephen, you are on mute.
There we go. So generally the date of export is going to be what's going to be utilized, which is the date from first port. So if it's transshipped, that should not cause an issue with the changing rates. That should be accurate based on that first port. The most important thing to think about, though, is also if for some reason the transshipment takes it past the May 27th date, all in-transit exemptions are then gone. So while that is unlikely on April 23rd for that to cause that to happen, that is something to just be aware of, that those exemptions do go away. And I do think on another side, I think we're getting questions regarding ITs as well. ITs do not change the final mode, so those will not impact the date of export or anything regarding the tariff that's being used to clear your goods.
Thanks, Stephen. And on a similar vein, we had a question, is the only factor to calculate the tariffs the ETD from origin and never the ETA? So I'll take this one quickly. I just touched base on the timeline. ETD is part of the equation, but for the reciprocal tariffs, there is a May 27th deadline to have the exemption, as Stephen just said. So ETA does matter for the reciprocal tariffs, and that is May 27th. Anna, let me ask you a question. So the 301 items that had an exemption are under review in May and June. Should I assume that these will not be extended if this is true, and we'll be adding another 25% to my items from China?
I mean, it's definitely possible that they won't be extended. Last time there was a pretty large gap between when they expired and were renewed. And I think this last time they weren't retroactively applied, meaning that goods imported during that gap period did not receive the benefit of the exemptions. So we'll all have to track those closely and see what the final language is in the Federal Register notice.
Great, thank you. We have a question, and this one is a hot topic, I will say, even at Flexport. If an item is subject to the 232 tariffs for aluminum or steel and contains aluminum or steel, do we have to pay the reciprocal tariff on the non-aluminum or non-steel content? So this is one of those questions that multiple people from industry have gone out to customs on. Flexport is continuing to push and ask for clarity on this question as well. Our understanding is that the reciprocal tariff does apply to the non-aluminum and non-steel content. And we have talked with other people within industry. There is a lot of consensus around this, but I will say it is not 100% uniform. So we have a question out to Trade Remedy. We actually received one response last night and it didn't clarify this part. So we've gone back again today to ask it once again. Customs has an obligation of informed compliance to importers and to industry. And I would say this is an instance where there's absolutely a lack of clarity on how to correctly assess duties for the steel and aluminum content. So I don't have the exact answer from customs, but I would say our interpretation of the regulations as of right now is that yes, the reciprocal tariffs do apply.
And Angela, maybe just piggybacking on what you said, in the event more clarity is obtained from customs and they determine that it doesn't apply, importers can file post-entry corrections if that is an option that is available at that time.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thanks, Anna. Let me ask you another one. I think this is an important one too. Is USMCA still active?
Oh, is that for me?
Yeah, Anna.
Is the USMCA still active?
We covered it a little bit last time, so maybe you can give us an update on USMCA really quickly.
Oh, yeah. So the USMCA agreement is still alive and doing well. In fact, the USMCA goods were excluded from the IEPA tariffs, and the 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico only apply to goods that do not qualify as originating under the product-specific rules of origin or under the USMCA rules of origin. But one important call out, if you're producing goods in Canada or Mexico that have Chinese components that are subject to trade remedies like the 301 and 232 and IEPA, you're going to want to make sure that the production processes occurring in those spaces are also a substantial transformation occurs of the Chinese components so that they are not also subject or still subject to the trade remedies. So a lot of companies did that after the 301 tariffs were implemented. It totally is possible for USMCA goods to be subject to, or the value of the Chinese components to be subject to trade remedies. So make sure that it's two separate analyses basically that need to be completed.
Okay, thank you. I'll take the next question. I was told that the date on the bill of lading is the date in which U.S. Customs knows if the tariff rates apply to a container, not when the goods are loaded or at the container yard. Please clarify. So traditionally and in the past, Customs has actually used the AMS date, the AMS export date, as the date of applicability for the tariffs. Now, the executive order on the reciprocals is much more open-ended than in the past. This is another area in which there are a lot of questions out to customs and looking for more clarity. The way Flexport is assessing this is that if it did move on a vessel and transshipped, that the exception would still apply. But as I said earlier, we advise all clients to have documentation to show this. We are looking for our clients at track and trace and carrier websites to see how it moved. What I do want to call out, though, is that if a shipment unladed in Canada and then moved via rail to the final destination, we do not believe that it would qualify for the exemption at this time. This, once again, is another area that there is still a little bit of discrepancy and lack of clarity from customs, but our assessment is that it is supposed to be on the final mode, and therefore if it is unlading in Canada and then moving on a final mode of rail, that it would not apply for the exemption. Let me ask you, Anna, this one, it's a little bit specific, but it says on slide 8, you stated tariffs on imported goods from China are 125% plus 20%, meaning 145%. However, I thought section 301 still stacks on top of this, bringing the total up to 170%. Is that not the case?
But so the Section 301 tariffs could apply at 0, 7.5, or 25%. So, but yes, they're additive, along with any other tariffs like anti-dumping, countervailing duty, normal trade relations, or if it's Section 232, you could have IEPA and 232 tariffs.
Yeah, I think the thing to remember here is just like Patrice said with the bonds, stacking is happening with the tariffs as well. So when you have the regular duty rate plus the 301, 232, IEPA fentanyl, IEPA reciprocal, there is some exceptions with the 232 to the reciprocal, but otherwise there is a lot of stacking that is happening with these tariffs.
Yeah, that's true. We have some clients that are paying 200% tariff, so
yeah, absolutely.
It's hard to put a generalization on it for sure.
Another question came in about the July 8th or the 90-day expiration. So it says, for reciprocal tariffs, do goods have to be cleared by July 8th or just be on a vessel by July 8th to avoid whatever country-specific reciprocal tariffs are in play? And the answer to that is we do not know. We do not know if the 90 days will be extended, if there will be a change in the regulation before then, or what the criteria will be if the 90-day is suspended. So as soon as there is more information on that, we will provide it out to everyone. But at this point, we do not know what will happen around the July 8th deadline. I do know that the administration has said they are working hard on a lot of tariff agreements and trade agreements with other countries. So hopefully what we'll see is some sort of reduction across multiple countries. Go ahead, Anna. I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I wouldn't operate with the assumption that there'll be another exemption. I would assume the worst is possible and hope for the best. So a good strategy would be to get your goods in before the those exceptions apply, or the 90-day pause expires.
Yeah. All right, Anna, let's close it out with one final question. If we have a defective shipment that arrived back in 2024 and we want to return the shipment back to our manufacturer in China to rework and ship it back to the US, how do we make sure we handle the clearance so that we are not tariffed 125% into China and another 145% back into the US?
Can't comment on China customs. I would reach out to a local expert, someone in country, to see how they're handling returns. But just generally speaking about on the U.S. side, there is a partial duty exemption under Chapter 98 for goods that are imported, duty paid, exported pursuant to a warranty, and returned, that allows the previously duty paid portion to enter free of duty. And the IEPA tariffs would be excluded under the Chapter 98, but you would need to pay the tariffs on the value added in China. So it's a case-by-case analysis, and you need to make sure that your situation fits within the partial duty exemption framework.
Great. Thanks, Anna. And with that, we'll go ahead and conclude today's webinar. I want to thank Patrice and Roanoke for attending this webinar and supporting Flexport as always today. I hope you guys learned a lot. And thank you all for attending as well. And a reminder to please share your feedback in the survey linked above. We will email everyone a link to the recording tomorrow morning, and please take a moment to download our slides. Thank you all again and have a great day.